Finally, this one here is one of my favorite gourmands done right. Hello, welcome back to Seldomly Off, and I'm Daniel. Today we're talking fragrances, and this is a practical review of Bond No. 9 New Haarlem. These reviews are for fragrances I have a lot of experience with, multiple wears and many situations, and I'm meant to give you a general idea of what it feels to wear the fragrance. As per usual, I do a lot of research before buying fragrances, but I don't really like to go into details about notes and accords, as I don't feel that it helps the end user. I'd rather talk about the wear experience as a whole. I've been saving this fragrance for a long time. I initially bought this bottle in early spring, and finally it's time to wear it. As you may know, I'm not a massive fan of gourmands. Specifically, vanilla gourmands don't really work for me. The heavy vanilla scent tends to be very cloying, very fatiguing, and very boring, especially if it doesn't really go an interesting nuance, and especially if the sweetness of said vanilla isn't perfectly tuned. I initially got Bond 9 New Haarlem almost right after getting Mancera's Amore Café. And that fragrance there actually really intrigued me. If you haven't seen my review, it's one of the earliest from my channel. That's from a while back. And in general, I really like the fragrance. The only issue that I had with the Mancera, and the issue that I have with most Manceras, is that their sweetness is a little bit too much, it's a little bit too one-dimensional. And given how long-lasting the fragrance is and how heavy and sweet it is without much transition, I ultimately found the fragrance to be a little bit fatiguing, and I sold it. When I initially bought the Mancera, this one here was actually the one I was looking for. Not because of the name, not because I knew what this fragrance was, but this is exactly a scent profile that I was looking for at the time. And when I finally pulled this out for the fall and winter season, and I say pulled out, but rather this thing has been sitting on my shelf all along, but when I wore this recently, I was absolutely impressed. As the first day I wore it, this is one of the most beautiful, balanced gourmands that I've ever tried. I don't have much experience with the house of Bond No. 9. This is actually the only fragrance that I have and purchased from the house. I have smelled some other ones. I smelled the Bleecker Street. I smelled some other ones that I can't remember. But the house really never stuck to me. I never really found the appeal. And these are very, very expensive fragrances. The house is incredibly expensive as a whole. I never really understood what the fuss was about, why these fragrances were so freaking expensive. And especially here, they're actually kind of hard to get. So ultimately, throughout the years, I kind of ignored Bond No. 9, and I directed my attention to other fragrance houses that were much to my liking, such as Amouage. So what did bring me to get this thing? Basically, before getting Amore Café, I started researching what that was. It was still kind of unavailable where I live. It was very difficult to get. I actually had to pay full retail price for that. And I started noticing that a lot of written and video reviews pointed out that Amore Café was basically a clone of this thing. And actually, that this thing had a component of lavender that really cut through the gourmand and made it a lot more wearable. If you want, this is like the masculine version of Amore Café. Now, I do think that Amore Café is actually a very, very unisex fragrance because it is kind of like an abstract version of that gourmand representation. But this frag here with this lavender note, which is arguably the highlight of this fragrance, makes the wear experience as a whole way better, way easier, way more suited to day, and especially if you're a guy that is a little bit afraid or not comfortable wearing uber sweet fragrances, this one here might be just the one for you. Before talking about what this smells like and about the scent profile as a whole, let's quickly touch upon the presentation. The Bond 9 fragrances are very, very recognizable. I have to say up front, I'm not a massive fan of the presentation, but I do respect the style. They have a very unusual, iconic look. The first thing that catches your eye is obviously the bottle shape. This star shape here is incredibly tacky, incredibly visible. The bottle itself is really big, and it might have to do with the fact that it's so thin, but it really sits massively next to other 100 ml bottles on my shelf. The bottle itself is very weirdly made. It feels in a way cheap just because it has this like lip or seam, which I'm sure is intentional, but it does kind of feel like it's part of the mold. I don't know why, but also the glass itself feels kind of thin. It doesn't really feel high quality and dense and as shiny or transparent as other bottles that I have. The cap feels incredibly cheap. It's weird because it feels like it's made of two materials. The purple part I think is glass, and the transparent part is definitely plastic. And you can definitely tell it's plastic because of the way it sits onto the bottle. And sometimes when you put the cap back, you even get a very plasticky crunch or click. There's a very dissatisfying type of tactile approach to the cap. I really do not like it at all. The atomizer is decent, it sprays well. It's definitely not one of those pressurized atomizers, but it does its job. Let's give it a couple sprays here. I wore this scent to work as usual when I do these reviews. Everyone seemed to like it. Actually, this is a very pleasing scent in the air. I think that this is absolutely mass appealing and easy to pull off, by the way. Finishing off the presentation, let's just quickly touch upon the labeling. It feels relatively high quality. They are stickers, but they have a sort of a laminated feel. So these are definitely not coming off. The one thing I really don't like about it is that if you flip the bottle around, you can clearly see like the glue that's behind the main sticker there. It's really unattractive. I know it's a minor detail because the bottle is meant to sit this way on the shelf, but again, some fragrance brands really pay attention to this stuff, even the way you turn the bottle around. It's okay, it's functional. I realize I'm being picky, but this is an expensive fragrance from a very expensive and luxurious house. And to be honest, they really should be paying attention to this sort of stuff. Last but not least, the box these come in are pretty good quality. They're very unique looking. They kind of look like a record, or at least I seem to remember, but the box itself is put together well and it gives you a good impression. Overall, the presentation is pretty mid. The cap is unexcusable. The bottle feels a little bit cheap. The aesthetic of the whole thing is very subjective, so I don't like it, but your mileage may vary. It's, at the very least, it's an iconic brand that has its own look and feel. Okay, let's get to the meat and potatoes of the review. What does Bond number 9 New Haarlem smell like? In short, this is supposed to smell like a coffee shop in the morning with breakfast. To me, it smells very much like pancakes and maple syrup. There's supposed to be a strong coffee note. I don't really detect that. There's a little bit of a bitterness that plays around with the sweetness and the lavender that gives me kind of almost a dark chocolate vibe. Or, hear me out, it gives me a licorice type of vibe. There's something about the way dark chocolate sometimes is represented in fragrances, and this happens in this fragrance here. It happens in Zerjov Symphonium, and it also happens in something else that I have that I can't recall right now. But sometimes the dark chocolate, especially if paired with some sort of a bright, more acidic note, it really comes across as licoricey to me. And the first memory association I have to this sort of smell is actually L'Aquilina Pink Sugar. Yes, I'm talking about that super cheap, super synthetic, teenage girl type of fragrance. There's something about that fragrance, there's something about that sort of smell that really triggers a very strong olfactory response, and I do really like it. And this one here has that sort of a dark chocolate, licoricey, kind of acidic type of thing. I can't really explain why, but I find it incredibly addicting, beautiful, and just really enticing. But let's back up a sec, because I said that this smells like pancakes and maple syrup, and I actually do back up that statement. I also said that this is often compared to Amore Café, and going back to that, Amore Café is supposed to also smell like a coffee shop, and the note evolution on that is supposed to be, or rather they would want it to be, basically a transition between coffee, a shot of amaretto, vanilla ice cream type of dessert, maybe a vanilla cake, and some sort of caramel background, maybe even salted caramel. Now that's a very complex rendition of a gourmand, and in practice, Amore Café did not really hit on all those notes. This is a much simpler idea, and it actually proves to be very accurate in execution. So when I talk about maple syrup and pancakes, I actually smell the doughiness of the pancakes. I actually smell that sort of a bitter, smoky aspect of the maple syrup. This scent is definitely not complex. I'm saying this up front. It's not hyper three-dimensional. It's not very high quality, in my opinion. It's just very good at what it is. It's very good at giving you a very specific image. And this whole gourmand aspect here is perfectly balanced by that beautiful lavender note I was talking about in the beginning. And what this lavender note does is actually two things. First, it cuts directly through the sweetness and it gives your nose a break. It gives your nose a breather. Second of all, it massively elevates the tonal range of the fragrance, bringing the highs way much higher up, and it completely elevates the scent profile from it being very, very base heavy, as most gourmands like this are. And don't get me wrong, this fragrance is actually still very sweet for all you gourmand lovers. And the lavender itself is not even that detectable, meaning that if you were to spray this on skin without knowing the note breakdown, without knowing about the fragrance, you'd probably just think that it's a really well-balanced fragrance. There's really nothing too lavenderish or fougerish about this fragrance. The lavender note in here functions similarly to as it functions in Masque Ravageur by Frédéric Malle. It's just there to elevate the fragrance, to give it a little bit more airiness, and to make it a little bit more wearable and easy to appreciate. As I mentioned, this fragrance is not very complex. It's actually quite linear and doesn't really transition much top to bottom. The main differences between the opening and the dry down for this are obviously that lavender note, which is a lot sharper in the opening. The coffee note is a lot bigger and more bitter in the opening. And when the scent dries down, the whole thing becomes smoother, as it usually happens. The scent becomes a lot more vanillic, a lot more traditionally gourmand. The whole thing just kind of sinks in the base of the tonal range and becomes a lot more of an enveloping sort of skin scent. And although the scent becomes a lot heavier in the dry down, it really never becomes cloying or overdone as some other gourmands. Even stuff like Baby Cat, which I absolutely adore, in the deep dry down, they become a little bit boring and monotone, and I get really tired of them. It doesn't happen with this. This is very dynamic, very zingy, even in the deepest of dry downs, even when this becomes a skin scent. Let's quickly touch upon practicalities. First and foremost, projection and longevity on this are absolutely massive. When you initially spray this, you're filling rooms straight up. It's beautiful, it's powerful, it's mass appealing. Everyone will be smelling this, so I really do advise to go easy on the sprays, especially when you're testing this out for the first time. The longevity is absolutely incredible. You get 12 plus hours of wear. And again, there's something about the zinginess, there's something about the energy that this fragrance has, even in the very deep dry down, that makes it very detectable on skin, even 8 hours down the road. I feel that versatility for this is also extremely high. You can wear this pretty much casual to elegant in many situations, day or night. The only thing you really have to pay attention to is the number of sprays. If I were to make this my fall, winter, or colder months signature scent, I would definitely wear less of it during the day and maybe add in a couple sprays at night when I really want to boost that performance. But yeah, it's a powerful fragrance. It's really functional. Even age-wise, I think this could be easily appreciated by a wide public. Everyone from late teens to a more mature audience could probably get a kick out of this. It's very pleasing. Again, it's so balanced, it's so wearable that it's really surprising for such a thing. This is a very perfumey fragrance, and that lavender note really distinguishes this from other gourmand fragrances, which tend to be a little bit more abstract and heavily unisex. I feel that New Haarlem might lean a little bit more masculine due to that edginess, due to that energy, but I'm sure that this could be easily appreciated by any woman. You just have to see if you kind of feel comfortable wearing this sort of scent profile. Overall scent profile, to me, this is a much better version and more wearable version of Mancera's Amore Café. If you're into that fragrance, you'll love this, absolutely. If you have experience with other fragrances heavy on the coffee, vanilla, caramel aspect, you also might like this. Overall, this is a very good fragrance. It's just a little bit difficult for me to recommend, mainly due to the price. When I got this, I got it on a discounter. It was heavily discounted, but I still paid 170-ish for it. So yeah, definitely not cheap. And when you look at it, when you break it down, especially from a frag enthusiast point of view, you really realize that this isn't really high quality. It's definitely not one of those fragrances that really impress you by the way it's made, by how 3D it is, by how realistic it is. This is a little bit mediocre in that sense. It's very good, I love it, and it wears perfectly, but it just feels a little bit mid quality in my opinion, especially for the price. If this was priced 80 to 120 retail, this would be an absolute recommendation for me. But at its actual real price, you have to sort of accept that this is a little bit of a mid product that's overpriced, and you just overall need to know what you're getting into. Okay, it's time to showcase a few options to Bond number 9 as per my latest videos. These are for fragrances that I have a lot of experience with, that are currently in my collection, and that I might have reviewed. If I haven't reviewed, reviews of these will be coming up soon. First option I want to talk about is Vanille Havane by Indemodables. Indemodables is one of my favorite brands. They make very, very special perfumes. Some of my favorite are Ambre Supreme, Vanille Havane, then we have Rose de Jamal. The fragrances from Indemodables are incredibly high quality, very complex, yet simple in concept. I really like them. Vanille Havane doesn't really fit the same profile as the Bond No. 9. None of these options really does. But this one here offers arguably a higher quality version of a Gourmand. It's still very wearable, still not cloying, still very adult, in a way masculine. This fragrance is characterized by vanilla, tobacco, and a little bit of a bougie note. The sweetness is not overdone in this. It wears beautifully. It's easy to appreciate. The only drawback to Vanille Havane is the price. This is very pricey. It's $220 for 50 ml, and the longevity is not that great. But nonetheless, it's still one of my favorite gourmands. It's very natural smelling. It's absolutely gorgeous. This other option is kind of an oddball, but curiously, it's actually the most similar to Bond No. 9. This one here is Toskovat, Silent at the Theme Park. This is a very strange fragrance from a very, very strange house. It's arguably the easiest to wear from the house that I've tried, at least. And this is a gourmand fragrance. It's supposed to be reminiscent of the memory of being at a theme park. Sweets, pastries, vanilla ice cream. It's incredibly evocative. It has beautiful narrative, very, very particular. It's actually quite soft compared to the Bond No. 9 in execution, but the longevity is great. It lasts all day. I really like this fragrance. It's really unique. I don't think that this one here is nearly the best from Toskovat. I feel that the house is capable of so much more. But this one here is a good fragrance to approach the house and a very beautiful, unique gourmand nonetheless. Last fragrance on the list of options is the one that differs the most from the scent profile. This one here is Andy Towers Heraud. This is a chocolate fragrance, and you might think that this has nothing to do with the Bond No. 9. And in a way, you would be right. But this is still a very good option for a gourmand that's not too heavy, not too synthetic, not too cloying or fatiguing. This is actually a very beautiful vanilla, milky, chocolatey thing with a facet of incense and a very unique wear experience. As per other Andy Towers, this wears dusty, it wears light, it's very enjoyable, it's not too sweet, and it's just so natural smelling. This is probably the most natural chocolate smelling fragrance that I've ever came across. And I'm showcasing this as an option because this might be exactly the type of gourmand fragrance that you're looking for if you're tired of the more conventional, uber sweet, uber overdone gourmands that are typically on the market. Great stuff. I'm really enjoying wearing this. Review of this coming soon. But back to New Haarlem. My final recommendations on this Bond No. 9 are the following. This is an absolute beast of a fragrance in all sense. It's basically very loud, very long lasting, very emotional, very energetic. It's just very in your face. It's great. It's very wearable. You can wear this pretty much in any situation. It's kind of like the ultimate gourmand on paper. The only thing that's holding it back, in my opinion, is the price and the general quality. But you know what? Ultimately, it doesn't really matter because gourmands like these are meant to be able to scratch that childish, primordial itch that we may have. Every time you wear this, you really can't help but smile. It's great. It really brings out that inner child in me, and I will cherish this for a long time. If you like this type of content, if you like my approach to video, feel free to subscribe. It always helps the channel and it's massively appreciated. If you want to interact with me, leave a comment, suggestion, opinion, or anything else down below. I always reply and I always keep the conversation open. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your time. It's massively appreciated. Many more videos to come. I have an endless stream of fragrances to review. See you in the next one. Cheers.